about to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out, die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's go, let's be free with me. Be free. Not looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out, die with my own doubts. Be free. Let's go, let's be free.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the latest A-Level Politics live stream. It's Jim here at Tutor2, and I'm joined today by Duncan in the middle. And of course, you may remember from earlier in the year, on the right-hand side, it's Kira, but it's Kira live from Arizona, I believe. Presumably using a satellite.
Very hot, hint the fan. Yeah, you know, rearing cattle, doing that kind of thing.
Don't tell that to Duncan because he's absolutely freezing cold in Yorkshire.
I know. It's a bit dark.
But there we go.
About 30 degrees here and 8:30 in the morning. So
All right. That's enough, Kira. Anyway, look, welcome. Kira, great to have you back with us. And Duncan too, of course. And this is a live session. And it's our second in our series this term. Every other week, we're doing a politics in the news discussion panel. So last week, we did our first of those. And then every other week, it's going to be a topic recap revision focus on some core content for A-Level politics students. And I think, Duncan, we're covering the sort of the key core ideologies to start with this term, starting with conservatism.
Absolutely. Yeah. Nice and current with the Conservative Party conference occurring, of course. But yes, so I'm sure quite a few people will be doing that at school at the moment or college, depending on where you got to by the end of year 12. But if you've already done it, that's fine. There's a good bit of revision, but otherwise we can help you with some of the learning of it if you're doing it about now.
Superb stuff. Well, if you're joining us live, and I can see on the window here lots of people are live in the live chat, please join in, type your answers into the live chat window. Now, many more people watch these sessions on catch-up or replay, in which case you don't get a chance to use the live chat, but you do get the chance, if you wish, to pause the video, maybe have a think about your responses, and then when you're ready, press play again and see whether Kira and Duncan's ideas and answers match yours. And we've got about 5 or 6 different activities which cover a range of different aspects of conservatism tonight. So when you're ready, Kira, Duncan, we'll make a start, shall we?
Absolutely. Let's get cracking.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we're going to start off with a 60-second challenge. So you're going to have 60 seconds or a minute, whichever you prefer, to match some key phrases to their definition. Now, these are going to be the key terms, or some of the key terms for conservatism from the specification. And we've got brief definitions. So we've got the key terms, A to H, on the left of the screen, and the brief definitions, 1 to 8, on the right-hand side. And all you've got to do is match the letter to a number. You've got 60 seconds. What I suggest you do is when you find one, type that one in if you're watching live and send us it, rather than waiting to get all of them. But see how many you can get in 60 seconds. Good luck. Good answer so far. Okay, see, maybe a couple more might come in while we're talking about it, but some good responses. Mr. X has got quite a lot there. We'll see if he's right in a moment. Oh, Anna's come through with a lot there as well, which are looking good. A couple of these terms are quite similar. They're sort of similar ideas, and so it's quite good to try and spot perhaps the slight differences in the definitions to get those kind of more subtle distinctions. Shall we have a look at the answers? We had some great answers come through. Okay, so how did Anna, I think, had a go at pretty much all of them there. How did she do? Looking pretty good. So tradition, the accumulated wisdom of previous generations. Noblesse oblige. That's traditional conservative and one nation conservative idea there about the nobles, the nobility having an obligation to those kind of below them in the social strata. Got hierarchy, lots of key terms here, which we will revisit through this session. And I reckon a lot of them were familiar to you because there's some really good answers. So well done with that. The ones that are sort of superficially similar, or not even just genuinely are quite similar. Noblesse oblige and paternalism, quite closely related concepts, and laissez-faire and libertarianism. But I do think those of you who put your answers did spot those differences, so well done. And if you are watching on catch-up, you can pause that for a while and have a read through those definitions if any of those terms were not familiar. Okay, shall we move on? I'm going to hand over to Kira for a moment now.
Cool. So what I want us to kind of think about is some of the exam technique, like how can you apply all of that content into exam essays in order to achieve your best kind of thing. So there's 3 key things that are quite important for an ideologies question. It's similar to the other 30-mark questions with some slight differences. So, for example, you need to make sure that instead of referring to political examples like you do for the normal UK politics questions, you need to refer to key thinkers instead. And that shows off your AO1. So showing that you understand the ideology through the thinkers that each strand kind of includes. You also need to make sure that you're comparing. So it's just like all the other questions, it's comparative. So your AO2 is, can you compare the different strands? Do you know how similar or how different they are as well? And then lastly, and you need to think, you've chosen politics, and we've seen in all of these live broadcasts so far that you certainly have an opinion, and that's a strength. So yeah, the AO3 then is about showing off that opinion, making it clear that you have a kind of side of the argument and putting that through quite clearly. So I'm going to kind of talk you through it, but feel free to kind of add any questions in the chat if you have any, or any comments that you kind of think of as we go through as well. So for the kind of next bit then, I'll show you what this looks like. So essentially the question could be any of these parts. So it will be something to what extent do conservatives agree on, more or less as the question stem. And you can have something which is asking you about a key component of the ideology or standard ideology. So do they agree on human nature, on the state, society, or the economy? And think about the three strands. So traditional, one nation, or new right conservatives as well. The thing that's different from the different ideologies is the core principles are different for ideologies. So for conservatism, do they agree on pragmatism? Do they agree on tradition and so forth? So if we were to think about it in terms of the role of the state then, so I'll kind of talk you through a quick question then. So actually this is for this next bit then. So if you ask the question, to what extent do conservatives agree on the role of the state, you need to think, okay, what are my best key thinkers to kind of exemplify that? So just to the next slide, sorry, Jim, thank you. So if you've got a question like this, you can think, okay, so who are the best thinkers that kind of exemplify traditional conservatives? Which thinkers actually do talk about the role of the state for that? And I've put down a kind of selection of thinkers here. So I'll talk then about how actually could we argue that they maybe disagree. And maybe you can think in the chat if you want to add how they might agree, which is probably a little bit more difficult on this one then. So for example, you could say that traditional conservatives and new right conservatives disagree on the role of the state. For example, Thomas Hobbes believed the state should be all powerful, that there should be very little freedom in order to protect against the state of nature. And this disagrees quite drastically with new right conservatives, where you have someone like Nozick, who is maybe more of a libertarian and argues that the state should have little to no freedom. So you can see that you're talking about the question, the role of the state, but you're using the thinkers to talk about the strand, so Hobbes is traditional, and you're comparing that traditional to the new right thinkers, so someone like Nozick. So they disagree because essentially they disagree on the extent of power that the state had. So agree is probably maybe a bit more tricky when we're talking about traditional and new right, but thankfully for conservatives, there's three strands, right? So you could argue then that traditional and one nation have some comparison because they talk about maybe more of an interventionist state in some ways, in order to kind of like Burke and Oakeshott having maybe the state having more of a role, paternalistic role in people's lives, for example. Okay, so for what I want us to think about then is how will you do when we're thinking about this? We're going to do an on balance activity then. And we're going to think, what two arguments can we think about when we think about the idea to what extent do conservatives agree about human nature? So what I want you to think about is, for the first one, can you list down as many arguments that you can think of in the chat that conservatives do agree about human nature, and extra points if you can put a thinker in as well. So I'll give you like 30 seconds to a minute just to think, how far do conservatives agree on human nature?
So we're thinking about the strands. Yeah, do one nation and traditional conservatives agree? What about new right? Can we think of that, and then giving an example of that with the key thinkers?
So yeah, so what do they think about the views of the potential of human beings? Are they positive or negative about human nature across all the strands?
I think one thing you find with sort of lower mark answers to these sorts of questions, Anna's put a negative view of human nature. That's interesting. You'll tend to find people sort of saying, basically just going through the key thinkers and saying what they say about the topic. And obviously what you want to do is more of a comparative analysis than that. So, focusing on the differences between the strands, and then using the key thinkers. So this is quite a good activity, isn't it? I think, to think about,
Yeah, and I
that
would
sort of
recommend
comparative analysis.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd recommend like looking through all of those different elements: human nature, the state. How do they agree? How do they disagree? It's really good for revision. So Mr. X said that one nation and traditional have negative view of human nature. Very true, right? They both argue that humans need they're not very independently thinking and things like that. So it's quite negative. And then you've got New Right has a much more positive view. Very true, right? So a view that you kind of have some rationality. It's a lot more like liberalism, actually. Hobbes and Nozick, again, are fantastic two key thinkers to kind of contrast for that. And I like the way that you frame that, so thank you. Okay, so let's see what we've kind of put down as some answers, but obviously they can be different. And Anna's put state of nature as well, very good point. So very negative view of it's like a war of all against all, right? So yeah, you could say that Hobbes and Rand agree that humans are selfish, even though there's some deviation in that. Or this idea of human imperfection. I think this is largely a key conservative idea that humans are imperfect. And because of that imperfection, traditional conservatives argue for a kind of a much more strong state in order to mitigate against that. And even one nation conservatives argue for a paternalistic state in order to kind of help those imperfect humans. So we'll do the same thing again, but maybe a bit easier to think about disagreements. So to what extent do conservatives then disagree about human nature? So put some ideas in the chat. So exactly like Anna and Mr. X have done. So thinking about the strands or a more kind of overview answer about how they disagree about human nature.
So we had one there, haven't we? Mr. X has said that New Right generally have a more positive view of human nature. Can we sort of put some flesh on those bones, perhaps give an example? Or I mean, I know we've got Hobbes versus Nozick, which is great, but in what way? Why is the New Right perspective on human nature more positive? What is it about their view of human nature that's more positive than the traditional conservative one? Just thinking here as well, while people are thinking about this, once you've sort of done this balancing act, you would need to kind of decide which way you were going to go with it, wouldn't you? So although there are arguments on both sides, you would ultimately need to decide that there's more agreement or there's more disagreement, and reach a conclusion in the same way that you have to with the 30-mark essays.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think that's the thing that's quite kind of difficult to navigate with this. It's okay once you get it, but it can take some time to get your head around it. And that's that you need to evaluate and compare. So you need to basically show that you can understand both points of view, that there is some agreement or some disagreement, but you do need to come over to a strong conclusion. So you need to think about overall, what do you think the most? So if you think they mostly agree, then you would argue they do mostly agree, and you'd explain that and justify that argument. But then you would kind of say there is some similarities though. So it's not completely different. There's some similarities, but you still say how those similarities aren't enough to kind of create agreement. I can see here, so you've got some good points for Mr. X again. So New Right believes that the market should be left alone to correct negatives of human nature. So great. So whereas we can see they agree that there's some limits to humans and they're imperfect, they do disagree on the response to that, right? So New Right is saying let's have as much freedom as possible despite that negativity, because the free market solves everything, right? So government action should be minimal. So perfect. So I'll show you the kind of two that I put down. So humans are rational according to the New Right. So exactly as Mr. X made his point when saying that, okay, well, yeah, so humans are rational, so let them kind of regulate themselves a little bit, even if they are selfish. And the difference is, of course, is how humans will cope with freedom. So Hobbes believed that humans could not cope with freedom, and so we need to have a strong government to stop them. Whereas Nozick believes that humans can in fact cope with freedom. So we shouldn't have any kind of interference, even taxation being seen as theft, for example. So perfect. And then, yeah, Jasmina mentioned one that we didn't mention as well. So one nation believes in more state intervention as well. So that stems off of the view of human nature. So nice link to that too. Okay, so what I want to show you then is how can we actually put this into a paragraph, right? So this is just a paragraph structure that I use with my students, and I found that it's helped to make their arguments a lot more clearer and concrete. So one thing that's incredibly important is you decide before you answer the question, what side are you on? So if you're arguing that they agree or disagree fundamentally on human nature, and when we're thinking about human nature, that's kind of, you could easily write just one paragraph on human nature, but how can you talk about agree and disagree within that? It's going to be quite difficult. So I would suggest kind of like a two main paragraph structure, where you basically break down the component that you're being asked into two. So for example, I'd create a criteria on human nature, and I think, okay, so there's the first bit would be, okay, what is their actual view on human nature? So we could argue that they ultimately agree on human nature because they're very pessimistic about it. They have a very negative view on human nature. So they are imperfect. But they actually really start to disagree on their response to that. So kind of actually what Jasmina kind of did there in her answer. So looking at the fact that they have their view of human nature, and their response to that view kind of decides and determines how they respond to human nature. So what you could do is, let's say we did the first paragraph, okay, they have a negative view of human nature, and you think, what thinker can exemplify that? You don't need to use all three strands in this section, in each paragraph. You can just kind of compare two, because I think that just makes it a bit easier for you. And you use your thinker to exemplify. So if we were going to say that they have a negative view of human nature, we can say, for example, Thomas Hobbes, a traditional conservative, argues that without law, you essentially have a state of nature where it's a situation of war against all. And you explain that. You explain this means that this is a negative view of human nature, and that's your analysis. Then you say, this is also seen within new right conservatives, where you have thinkers like Rand, who argues that humans are very selfish and self-seeking, and explain that this means that they ultimately agree on human nature within that. And then you kind of come to your judgment and you say, okay, well, ultimately, the core view of what they believe about human nature is that they are very pessimistic about it. So therefore, this kind of agreement means that conservatives are in agreement in human nature. And for your second paragraph, you can mention that they disagree about human nature, but it's really important that if you've argued fundamentally that they agree, that you link back to why the agreement is greater than the disagreement. So it's just quite an important kind of thing to practice, which is quite important. So of course you can add more questions in the chat. And over to you, Duncan.
I was just going to say that is a monster paragraph, isn't it? So you're not expecting like lots of paragraphs in this 24 marker essay, are you? It's a couple of those would, with introduction and conclusion, would be sufficient, probably, wouldn't it? 2 or 3 of them. Would you say?
Yeah, definitely. And I'd actually say even in an introduction, just very short.
Just
it's only a few lines.
Brief.
Yeah. So bear in mind you're doing an essay in very short time limits. So don't be too hard on yourself, and the examiner knows that too. So just the most important part of this is the paragraphs and the conclusion, I think.
Yeah, and keeping that judgment throughout, probably mentioning your judgment in that brief introduction and making sure you're consistent with it. Yeah. Okay, shall we look at the next activity? So this is a word association activity. So it's just for you to think about key terms and possibly people as well. You can bring in people that you relate with conservatism, and just to concentrate our mind with it, you're going to come up with one for each of the letters in the word conservatism. Now, I have to say, if you come up with a good one for V, I'll be really impressed, because I really struggled. So if you come up with a good one for V, you'll get a special extra round of applause. But okay, so you've got a timer on, is about to start in a moment, and you just need to see if you can come up with a key term or person's name relating to conservatism that starts with each of the letters in the word. So good luck. just type them in. Yeah, say C Conservative. So that's a cop-out, but you could get with that. O, whatever it might be. Probably get a couple of key thinkers in there. Oh, Mr. X has gone for Thatcher. I'm assuming that's for T. Yeah.
You've also put a very good one for V.
Oh, brilliant. Oak shot, very good. Not added time, so that's better than mine, really. Okay, there's a few coming through. We've got New Right, we've got Monetary, we've got Oak Shot, we've got Value Added Tax, we've got Thatcher, Rab Butler for our. Okay, that's well done, Anna. Organic Society, Edward Heath, but we'll go with the names of politicians. It's not a bad idea. Society for S. Yeah, we've got to find two S's, haven't we? But Society is a good one for one of them. Shall we have a look what I came up with? I think you've come up with some better ones. So community, if you think particularly some of the sort of traditional and one nation type conservatives think about community. Of course, you can also think about sort of the negative side of it. So obviously, sort of we had reference to Thatcher earlier. The idea there's no such thing as society. What do conservatives think about community? Got organic society, nationalism, society, evolve to conserve or reform to conserve. Rand, voting. I went for V. I thought V was very difficult. Atomism. That's one of the key terms in the specification. The idea that people, very much individualistic. The sort of it links more with the sort of New Right side of things. Tradition. Imperfection, that idea of human nature being imperfect, the state and the different views on the state, and the monarchy. But we've had some really good suggestions in the chat window, and I'm sure those of you watching on Catch Up will have come up with some other key terms there as well. So well done. And I think we might be on to our final activity now. Which is one we call Word Smash. If you've watched Richard Osman's House of Games, you might have seen something a bit like this on the television. Obviously, this is entirely different and hasn't been copied off Answer Smash on Richard Osman's House of Games at all. But you might have seen something vaguely similar, where essentially you get a question or a clue, and then another one, and you've got to kind of smash the answers together. So there's an example here that has nothing to do with conservatism, which is a thick-skinned mammal with large ears and tusks. And what is the southernmost continent of the world, home to the South Pole? So the first one's elephant, the second one's Antarctica. The end of the first word is the start of the second. So we put them together, it's Elephantarctica. The few we're going to look at now are obviously to do with conservatism. The second bit, the question, is about conservatism. The first part will be sort of random clues. Shall we have a look at the first one and see how you do? So the tabloid nickname for the former Labour leader Miliband, and author of Reflections on the Revolution in France. So these are all these few that we've got in here. They're all our key thinkers. We've been looking at key thinkers, but we've done them with an answer smash, a word smash. So tabloid nickname for former Labour leader Miliband, and author of Reflections on the Revolution in France. So I reckon if you know one or the other, you'll be able to put them together. Clive's pretty much there. Yeah, shall we have a look? Red Edmund Burke. So Red Ed was the nickname, and Edmund Burke. I don't know Edmund Burke well enough to call him Ed Burke, but maybe he was known as Ed to his friends. Obviously, Red Edmund Burke is pretty much the most inappropriate nickname you could have for Edmund Burke. But there we go, bacon sandwich Burke. Yes. Okay, so that's our first one, Red Edmund Burke, Red Ed and Burke. So you got the idea now. So the next one, 12 Noon, and the author of Atlas Shrugged. So do you know who wrote Atlas Shrugged? Conservative key thinker. There's a clue. And how might that roll on from 12 Noon? What do we think? Have people got the hang of this style activity here? It's a bit of fun, really, but it does. You do need to know the fact about the key thinker to work it out. going through. I'm going to give a clue. It's a new right thinker, or more of a new right thinker. Oh, we've got the first half of it, midday. 12 noon is midday. Oh, Mr. X has gone PM Rand. Midday Rand. Clive's got it, yes. Let's have a look there. Midday Rand. Midday and Ayn Rand gets us to Midday Rand. Okay, oh, Jasmina got it. Well done. Okay, and I think we've got one more of these. Slightly obscure clue here. This is one's probably more for the teachers than yeah, you might get it. So the Grange Hill anti-drug song. So that is from the 80s. So but you may know it. It's something that comes up on those kind of TV programs about do you remember the 80s or whatever. And then Libertarian Robert. Okay, so if you know a Libertarian Robert, you might be able to link it to the Grange Hill anti-drug song. I will obviously, if you don't know the first half, you can write the name of the second half. Oh, Tutor to You's given the first half of the clue in the chat because they've recognised the Grange Hill anti-drug song. Just say no. So it must be. Anyone coming in with it? Just say Nozick. Well done, Clive. Okay, just say Nozick. Here's our Libertarian Robert there, Robert Nozick. Okay.
I mean, I'm just about old enough to remember Grange Hill, but not the song.
Do you remember the song? No, it's summer. No, okay.
Well, don't worry, Kira, because Duncan's about to sing it for you.
Oh, I'm not, but you'll be relieved to hear.
Pastoral.
That word smash, that's breaking news. That's a new question format for the EdXL A-Level Politics paper. Paper 4.
Yeah, 30 marks on word smash. Yeah.
Superb stuff. Well, that's perfect timing as well. Bang on half an hour. We promised our audience that these sessions would last around about 30 minutes, and that's perfect. So superb stuff. That whole piece around the exam technique, the paragraph structure there, Kira, that's gold dust stuff, isn't it? Just helps provide a framework to try to build an argument and address the demands of the question.
Absolutely.
Definitely,
Really
very important.
useful.
Superb stuff. That's conservatism. And I'm sure further on this year, we will perhaps go into sort of a bit more detail or other aspects of conservatism. We'll revisit this, maybe as part of a broader ideologies session as we get closer to the assessments in 2022, which is where we are now. But fantastic. Many thanks to everyone who's joined us live. If you've enjoyed the session, if you found it useful, give us a thumbs up. If you've not enjoyed the session, you've not found it useful, give us a thumbs up because that will help YouTube suggest the session to other people. And of course, we know that hundreds, in fact, from last week, almost 1,000 students have watched the session, the politics panel on demand. So hopefully you've also found it useful on this introductory exploration of conservatism. Superb stuff. Next week, we are back with our topical politics panel discussion. Then the week after that, which one are we going for, Duncan? Have we decided yet? Is it socialism or liberalism?
I think liberalism. I think we're going in sort of spec order, so we'll look at liberalism in 2 weeks. Yeah. So if that's something you want to do some work on, we'll see you there.
And the best way to get an alert as soon as that session is added is to subscribe to the Tutor 2 YouTube channel, and you'll get an alert. By the way, if you want to go back over any of these sessions, including all the ones we did earlier this year, and or download all the PowerPoint slides, go to tutor2.net/live and just choose A-Level Politics. There are lots of other subjects on there you can watch. And then every session, as soon as the live session's finished, the replay is there. But perhaps just as importantly, the PowerPoint is there to download, maybe to add some stuff to your notes and all that kind of stuff. Superb. Right. Many thanks, Kira. Well done for keeping your satellite phone operational from Arizona.
From the desert, yeah.
And Duncan, well done for keeping your internet connection live from Yorkshire.
It was a struggle.
Great to see you, Kira, Duncan, and we'll catch all of you for the next Politics live stream session in a week's time. So thanks very much.
Perfect. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.